Time stamped itself into the glass that morning, February 2nd, 7:40 a.m., North Island, San Diego. The briefing room smelled like burnt coffee and aircraft oil, the kind of scent that clings to uniforms and old victories. I carried one folder, nothing else, a silent rectangle of paper. Operation Silent Ridge lived on its tab like a scar that had learned to sit still. Brent Halverson stood near the projector, new command sheen, on his grin voice casual, already measuring who mattered and who did not. He looked past my rank, past my wings, past the years. "Mom, could you fetch us some coffee before we start?" A few officers laughed, not loud, just enough to show which way they thought the wind was blowing. I let the sound pass through me like prop wash. I set the folder down where he could not miss it and said, "You already have enough bitterness in the room." His grin tightened. Pens clicked. A clock on the wall ticked too brightly. Names went around the table with the efficiency of checklists. When it reached me, I stood not to be taller, only to be clear. Commander Elise Rowan. The projector hummed. Brent lifted his chin and said, "Your call sign for the record." The room leaned in, amused, expecting more coffee talk, expecting small. I felt the old cold move through me. The one from the ridge, and the storm, and the night. The instruments went blind. I remembered engines straining ice, clinging to blades, the voice in my ear saying abort, and another voice saying negative. I remembered the faces we lifted from white hell, the weight of them, the way silence hit when the last man cleared the door and the cabin went light, like a chapel. I looked at Brent, at the room, at the mist on the glass, and I answered, "Shadow 6. The effect was immediate. Laughter stopped in mid-flight. Chairs did not scrape. Someone set a cup down and forgot to breathe. The word did the work. It always had. It was not a boast, it was weather, the kind that makes men look up. Lieutenant Jason Cole rose from his seat before he remembered protocol. His voice carried the rasp of memory. "Mom, were you the pilot from Silent Ridge?" "The same one," I said. "The one who brought your men home." The first time he told me to fetch coffee, he did not touch his own again. That truth landed now with quiet authority. Brent tried to recover with a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Good," he said then. "Perhaps you can help us with turbulence." "Turbulence is the only thing I've ever handled better than men," I said, and I kept my tone even. Even is sharper than loud, even cuts. Files shifted. Someone cleared his throat. I opened the folder. Paper breathed. I felt the room measure me again, recalculating range fuel mission profile, the way crews do when weather changes without warning. Every joke dies when truth walks in uniform. I did not need to say it. They could hear it in the quiet. The memories moved not to haunt, but to align. The storm, the radio, the moment the horizon vanished, and only training remained. I remembered men waving from a scar of ice, and the way their relief felt heavier than their weight. The past stood up beside me like a second shadow. The room could feel it the way you feel a front moving in. Brent looked down at the tab on the folder as if letters could rearrange themselves and make him write. They could not. This was the morning silence outranked pride. This was the morning rank learned what reputation means when it is earned under weather and not in a hallway. I did not come to punish. I came to instruct. Yet instruction sometimes requires a mirror, and sometimes the reflection is cold. Jason remained standing, eyes bright with the kind of gratitude that makes a career. He nodded once, not to me, to the fact of the thing. The clock ticked on. Outside, the rotors kept time. Inside, the air took a new shape. I closed the folder. The meeting would continue slides and schedules, but everyone present already understood the main lesson. Respect can be delayed. It cannot be denied forever. He told me to fetch coffee. I brewed a storm instead. I did not raise my voice, I raised the record. The call sign carried weight that did not need ceremony. Curiosity turned to respect. The room learned what weather teaches pilots, that calm decides outcomes. I stood there breathing salt and jet fuel and memory, steady, unshaken, ready to begin. The sea outside my window moved like breath caught between memories. Coronado mornings had that kind of silence that pretended to heal. I had learned to live inside it, the hum of air conditioning, mixing with the gulls outside, the smell of salt and burned coffee from the percolator. 3 days before the briefing, I opened my inbox expecting bills and found a message from the Pentagon. Reactivation request, tactical aviation advisor. The words looked clinical, bloodless, but I could hear the pulse under them. Reactivation was not a favor. It was a summons from ghosts. My apartment was small, a safe house of sorts. The walls held medals and commendations, all polished but somehow lifeless. There were no pictures, no frames of anyone's face. The absence was deliberate. I had traded people for peace. I clicked the email again just to be sure it was real. It was. My old clearance had been renewed 2 days before, quietly without a phone call. That meant someone wanted me back before I had a chance to ask why. I stared at the message until the screen dimmed. My reflection looked older than I remembered, sharper at the edges. The uniform had been hanging in the closet for 3 years, still folded around the weight of what ended it. Divorce is paperwork. Survival is repetition. 2021 was the year I stopped sleeping with both eyes open. Aaron Briggs had taught me that vigilance had a price. He used to slam doors as punctuation, the sound that followed arguments about duty, about control. He would toss a cup against the sink and watch it shatter, then look at me as if the glass were my fault. You think the sky makes you untouchable. That was his favorite line. The last time he said it, I signed the divorce papers before he could finish his sentence. The sky had saved me once. It could save me again. I left the house with nothing but my logbooks and the jacket that still smelled like rain from the bearing deployment. Since then, I had not heard his voice, except in the rustle of news briefs about defense contractors' procurement boards, all the places where money dressed itself as duty. I knew he was still in the system somewhere near the edges of legitimacy. That knowledge sat in me like ballast. When I received the new orders, a single name in the CC line froze me more than the message itself. Colonel Brent Halverson. I knew that name. He had been a lieutenant, once Aaron's wingman, loyal enough to look away when loyalty paid better than honesty. I remembered his handwriting on reports, neat and cautious, always slightly too perfect, the kind that looked reviewed before written. Now he was my superior. The Navy has a sense of humor. The orders said training session, a program for tactical standardization. But the attachment told another story, a classified project number tied to Operation Silent Ridge, the mission they had sealed in 2016 after the storm that changed everything. My hands went cold as I read the header, Audit Review Preliminary Phase. It was not training. It was a quiet investigation. Someone in the department wanted the truth exhumed but not announced. They needed a ghost to do it. That was me. I closed the laptop and leaned back, listening to the sound of the waves hitting the rocks under the balcony. The rhythm was familiar, steady, almost kind. The sea does not forgive, but it remembers. I made coffee and watched the sun drag itself through the blinds. The first sip tasted like routine, the second like resignation. I told myself this was just another tasking, another temporary reactivation. But the pulse in my wrist said otherwise. Silent Ridge was unfinished business, not because I wanted revenge, but because truth unfiled keeps whispering. I opened the closet and looked at the uniform the way the name tape had faded slightly, the stitching still holding. I traced the letters with one finger, wondering if anyone at North Island still remembered. He was my husband. Now he is the ghost behind this mission. The irony was sharp enough to smile at. Brent and Aaron were two sides of the same coin men who mistook authority for respect. They would see me soon, and neither would know the difference between return and reckoning. I packed light. The folder, the uniform, the flight log, a pair of gloves I still carried from the Ridge sortie worn through the seams. When I zipped the bag, I could almost hear the engines start. They called it a training session. I called it unfinished business. Outside, a helicopter passed low over the water sound, bouncing off the windows. I stood still until it faded, then whispered to the quiet, "The sea doesn't forget the names we whisper." The air at North Island tasted like jet fuel in memory. My boots felt heavier than I remembered, or maybe the ground was just less forgiving. Returning to base after 3 years was like walking into a photograph that never stopped aging. Everything looked the same but smelled different, like metal that had been washed too often. I signed in at the main gate, handed over my credentials, and waited as the guard scanned them longer than necessary. When he looked up, his tone changed. "Welcome back, Commander." The words were polite, but the pause between them carried questions he did not ask. The hangars gleamed under the January sun. I passed the row of aircraft, each one a shape from an old dream. On the far tarmac, a training unit practiced formation taxi. The sound of engines layered with gulls and ocean wind made the world feel steady again. Inside the operations building, the air conditioning hummed like white noise meant to drown memory. I was led to a temporary office, small, windowless, lined with files that smelled of paper instead of salt. A young officer stood when I entered, Lieutenant Lexi Moore. Her voice caught slightly when she said it, not from fear but reverence. She looked too young to have learned disappointment yet. Her handshake was careful, her eyes wide in that way people look at medals, not at the people who wore them. She had no idea who I was, not really. To her, I was just a name on an assignment. She gestured toward the desk. "Commander Halverson will brief the team at 1300. He said you could join us." I nodded and asked about the weather. She smiled, relieved by the small talk, and said the forecast looked clear for once. I almost said they always say that before the storm. I stopped myself. The clock said 11. 2 hours to remember how to breathe like I never left. When the meeting began, the room was full of uniforms and the rustle of printed slides. Brent stood at the front, confident voice, polished same grin as before. He talked about the new evaluation program, about leadership and accountability, words that sounded heavy until they evaporated. Then casually he added a story. There was a female pilot years ago, he said, the one who nearly lost a team of SEALs over the Bering Sea. The room chuckled. He laughed too soft and knowing. She panicked, lost radar, almost iced the engines, but hey, everyone survived. A lesson in luck, gentlemen. My hand stilled on the pen. The words felt surgical. He told my story like a joke. He forgot I survived it. I looked around the table. Lexi was there, taking notes, her brow furrowed as if she sensed something wrong, but could not name it. Brent caught my eye, smirked, then clicked to the next slide. I forced myself to breathe. My voice stayed even. I said, "The mission was Silent Ridge, not the Bering Sea, and luck had nothing to do with it." He blinked confused for a second, then realized the correction. His face flushed, not from guilt, from exposure. I leaned back. The projector whirred. My mind went back to 2016. The storm was white beyond comprehension. Radar was gone, instruments blind. The radio crackled with orders. "Abort mission." I said negative. "We bring them home." The cockpit shook like the bones of the world. Ice crawled up the windshield engines, screaming against drag. The SEALs below were pinned between waves taller than houses. I descended through static and prayer. The altimeter spun. When the last man boarded and the cabin sealed, the silence hit so hard it felt like gravity forgot itself. We lived, but something stayed out there, half buried in snow and rumor. I returned to the room. Brent had moved on, pretending the joke had never been told. I wondered if he remembered the aftermath, the reports he helped rewrite the names, moved to the wrong columns. Lexi looked at me again, eyes narrowing as if the puzzle was starting to make sense. The meeting ended with applause, the polite kind that fills a void. As we left, Lexi caught up to me. "Mom, have you ever flown in a storm like that?" I met her gaze. Some storms don't end when the engines stop. She hesitated, sensing the truth underneath, then nodded and walked away. The hallway lights flickered, once just enough to feel like the past exhaling. Outside, the ocean wind picked up, carrying the faint tang of rain. I knew the weather was turning not on the forecast, but in the room we had just left. The officers' club on a casual Friday sounded like a hangar that had learned to laugh. A week after the briefing, the base let its guard down, sleeves rolled ties, loosened a piano searching for a tune it once knew. I do not drink much, but I know the taste of a room. It tasted like salt varnish, and the bravado that follows routine. Lexi walked beside me, careful and bright, asking about approach procedures and how to read wind off the bay at dusk. I answered and kept my eyes on the mirror behind the bar, the one that shows who wants to be seen. Aaron Briggs stood there in civilian clothing that tried to look effortless and failed. Contractors often dress like that, as if comfort could pass for authority. He turned and let recognition ripple into a smile I knew too well. He came over like a front, all pressure without weather. "Well, if it is not the legend back from sabbatical," he said loud enough for nearby tables to harvest the remark. He looked at Lexi without asking her name, then at my empty ring finger, and I watched the small victory cross his eyes. "Good evening, Aaron," I said. "I see contracting agrees with you. It agrees with accountability," he said, and tapped the bar for a drink he did not need. Then he leaned closer just enough to be heard by those who wanted to listen. "You left active duty after panic attacks, right?" He smiled as he said it, like a locker room story polished into a joke. The blade was soft but sharp enough to draw attention. Lexi did not move, but the room adjusted its posture. "No," I said. "I left to see who survived without medals." His smile held for a beat and then stumbled. The bartender set a glass down and drifted away as if sound could stain a counter. He taught me silence. I learned precision. The line wrote itself across my mind like a checklist. Aaron turned toward the crowd. "We all remember Silent Ridge, do we not? Storm of the century, no radar, a close call, a fine cautionary slide." He lifted his glass to no one and waited for permission to arrive as laughter. A laugh answered him from somewhere behind. Brent stood near a far table, smiling with men who smiled back when he did. Memory unspooled. A door slamming, a lock clicking, a room gone quiet on purpose, not by accident. "I control the sky now," he had said then, when a contract fell through and pride needed a target. He stood between me and the hallway, not touching, not loud, just present in the way the worst nights are present. That night ended with an apology that sounded like weather. "It will blow over." It did not. I learned the difference between calm and quiet, between a truce and a pause. The lesson stayed. I returned to the bar and to the man who believed the past would sit if told to. He said to Brent, as if I were a framed print on a wall, "We took care of business after that storm, did we not? Paperwork can be made to reflect reality or something that looks like it." Brent lifted his chin but did not cross the room. He nodded once the way men nod when they hope the nod will count as courage. Every bruise fades. The paperwork does not. I let the words harden. "How much did it cost in 2017 to make reality look softer?" I asked. He laughed, but his eyes blinked twice in quick succession. Did the favor come as cash, as placement, as a promise, written in an email that forgot how to delete itself? The piano stalled mid-phrase. Glass polished itself by the hand that held it. "You have always been dramatic, Elise," he said. The reports were reviewed according to process. Bad weather, grateful outcomes, an officer who learned something about limits. A tidy story. He glanced at Brent, and the glance landed like a receipt. Brent looked away. Lexi spoke without raising her voice. "Sir, I read the safety bulletins from that year. None mention an abort request. That seems unusual for a storm that severe." She was careful, polite, exact. I felt pride stand up beside me. "Accidents happen," Lieutenant Aaron said. "We do not build careers by second-guessing rescues that ended well." He faced me again. "You should enjoy your return. Nothing to prove, nothing left to chase." His words were sugar on a hook. My return is not about proving anything I said. It is about teaching the difference between a storm and a cover story. Tables had fallen quiet. Someone tried to repair the mood with a joke and failed. Brent stayed where he was. He'd always been good at staying where he was. Aaron moved closer and lowered his voice. Do not start a scene. People respect you less when you ask them to remember what makes them uneasy. His breath smelled like hotel bars and speeches about valor. I said, scenes start themselves. Truth does not need a stage. He tried a different tactic. We could talk later, he said. I know you are advising on the new program. There are ways to help each other. He meant favors. He always meant favors. We are already helping each other, I said. You are reminding me why accountability exists. He looked as if I had used a language he once knew and forgot. Lexi touched my elbow. Do you want to leave? She asked. Not yet, I said. Tell me one thing, I said to Aaron, who paid Brent in 2017 to revise the after-action report. His mouth opened and closed. There it was, the seam in the wall. He smiled to cover the quiet. Do not be foolish, Elise. Nothing illegal happened. Procurement is complicated. Reviews are complicated. Memory is complicated. He wanted the room to nod and return to laughter. The room did not oblige. Justice begins where fear ends. The sentence arrived like a clean horizon. I did not have to raise it. I just stood inside it. You think you can scare me with questions, Aaron said. Not with questions I said, with answers. He took a step back, smiling for the last time in the way men smile when a door is closing. He told Brent he would call him. Brent nodded without looking at me. The gathering loosened into new conversations that did not know what to do with themselves. Lexi and I walked into the corridor where the air smelled like a new start. Was that your husband, she asked? He was, I said. That is a past tense I keep polished. It is strange, she said, how the loudest people require the quietest paper. You will make a good instructor, I said. Keep a record that does not tremble. Outside the bay pushed a long breath across the island. Runway lights began their patient blink. He wanted the past to be a joke. He wanted the paperwork to finish what his pride began. But the sea remembers, and so does the system when you feed it proof. I watched Lexi drive away her taillights small as embers. The sky looked honest again. Some storms do not end when the engines stop. Some keep moving until they find the people who named them. This one had found me. I was ready to meet it at altitude. I stepped outside again and felt the night decide to clear. The club behind me returned to chatter, but the thread we had pulled stayed in my hand. Tomorrow, I would request access to archives, not to argue to verify. Proof does not raise its voice. It only arrives. The bay light steadied. I thought of the hearing I could feel on the horizon and kept walking toward it. The archives smelled like dust and air conditioning, the kind of cold that never truly leaves a file room. I'd been reviewing flight records when I heard Lexi call from the next aisle. Her voice carried a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Ma'am, I think you should see this. She held a manila folder, the label barely legible, Operation Silent Ridge. I took it from her hands and felt the paper hum, faintly with history. Most classified files have a rhythm, a pulse of secrecy that anyone who has ever written a report under pressure can recognize. I opened the folder and saw a duplicate mission log stamped in red as copy, not original, but the handwriting was unmistakable. Page after page of routine entries, until one line cut through everything. Abort request denied by Lieutenant Aaron Briggs. My breath caught between words. The same hand that hit me once signed that order. For a moment, the room tilted. I had asked for that abort during the storm the night ice formed faster than thought, when the engines shook so hard I thought the rotors would snap. The line on the page made the memory feel physical again. I ran my thumb over the signature. The pressure of the pen still faintly indented in the paper. It was his. No copy machine could mimic that exact force. I exhaled slow, silent, as if the act itself might wake something sleeping in the metal shelves around us. Lexi waited. Is it real? She asked. It is worse than real, I said. It is accurate. She frowned, not understanding. Some truths are too neat. When they resurface, someone will decide they are inconvenient. Keep this between us. I I slid the folder back into its sleeve, memorizing its location. She nodded, still pale. I locked it in the cabinet, logged out, and walked to the courtyard. The air outside felt too warm, the kind that clings to the skin. He buried the truth under metals. That thought refused to fade. Later that afternoon, Brent called me into his office. The blinds were half drawn, letting stripes of sunlight cut across his desk. He smiled with the ease of someone who thought charm was armor. "Heard you and Moore were doing some archival work," he said. "How thorough." I kept my tone level. Standard review, nothing more. His smile stayed, but his eyes hardened. "Be careful about what you read, Elise. Some records exist for context, not judgment." I said judgment comes from omission, not context. His jaw tightened. He stood, walked to the window, and pretended to look at the airfield. "Moore is a good officer," he said, almost kind. "I would hate to see her transferred this early in her career. Guam is always looking for admin support." It was not a threat disguised as advice. It was the reverse. I met his reflection in the glass. "You can move her, not erase her." He turned then, and for the first time I saw the panic under his professionalism. He asked if I understood chain of command. I told him I understood accountability better. The silence stretched. He ended it with a nod. "That will be all." When I stepped outside, Lexi waited near the hall. Her voice was low. He called me in, too, said I should focus on current assignments. I told him I was following your lead. I smiled, though my stomach felt like it was folding. "Brave," I said. "Stupid, maybe," she replied. "Sometimes they look the same." That night, I could not sleep. The words from the file replayed until they blurred with the sound of the waves outside my window. Abort request denied. The phrase was small, tidy, bureaucratic, but it carried weight heavier than weather. I thought of Aaron, of the mission, of the way he used to say precision was obedience. Precision, I realized, could also be rebellion. I wrote down the document number and date, tore the page from my notebook, and burned it over the sink. I did not need paper to remember. In the morning, I requested an unrelated audit for training safety logs, a pretext to trace where that duplicate came from. The system flagged a missing original filed under a retired code. Someone had already cleaned, but not enough. In cleanup, there is always residue. Every redaction leaves edges that glow under light. He had buried the truth under metals. I intended to dig through the shine. Lexi stopped by my desk before noon, her hands clasped tight. "They changed my rotation," she said. "Orders came in this morning. I am reassigned to logistics at Point Mugu, effective immediately." I nodded. That was faster than I expected. "You will go," I said. "Follow the order." She looked confused. "If I go, they win." "Not yet," I said. "You will take copies. Keep them safe, but do not open them. The less you know, the safer you stay." She hesitated, then nodded, eyes steady. The sound of the clock in the hallway filled the space between us. When she left, I sat with the file's ghost still open in my mind. The signature, the ink, the denial. Everything fit too neatly. Someone had planned this version of history. I remembered the helicopter shuddering and the whiteout Aaron's voice clear in my headset. His certainty. Negative proceed. Then the explosion later that month. His guilt rewritten as heroism. The metals confirmed the myth. The myth buried the truth. That evening, I walked past the hangars until the lights thinned. The air smelled of oil and memory. I watched a training jet land its shadow, stretching across the concrete like a question with no safe answer. The same hand that hit me once signed that order. The thought followed me home. The sky above Coronado burned orange over the ocean, calm as deceit. The Monday morning briefing began like any other ritual of rank. The projector hummed the blinds half closed to tame the sun, and the scent of burnt coffee clung to the walls as if authority had its own aroma. I took my seat near the far end of the table, a row of uniforms stretching like a single spine of hierarchy. Brent stood at the head, confident casual already performing before the first slide appeared. The agenda said Tactical Integration Review, but the subtext was rehearsal. Every man in that room had practiced his confidence in mirrors. I let them. The table reflected faces caught between boredom and pride. When Brent spoke, his voice carried that easy arrogance of someone convinced the air bends for him. "Thank you for joining us, Commander Rowan," he said, his smile too polished. "We thought you might contribute to the turbulence section." He paused just long enough for laughter to ripple. "Maybe our lady pilot should handle that part. It was meant to amuse, not offend, but humor built on assumption always bruises." The laughter spread small and lazy like wind before a storm. I waited for the echo to fade. "Turbulence," I said, "is the only thing I have ever handled better than men." The words fell soft but exact. The room tightened. Brent blinked once, unsure if I had insulted him or simply corrected the atmosphere. Laughter dies faster than truth. That was the first lesson of command I ever learned. He cleared his throat and gestured to continue. As I stood to present the flight coordination data, I saw Lexi at the corner of the table, her pen hovering above her notes. Her expression was steady, not shocked, not proud, just aware. I began to outline the operational parameters, the coordination between aviation and ground support, and the safety redundancies we were expected to teach. Brent interrupted again, tapping his fingers. "Before we go any further, Commander, remind us, what is your call sign?" The tone was light, the kind of tone that assumes laughter will follow. A few chuckles bubbled near the end of the table. The projector flickered once as if the air itself held its breath. My voice stayed calm. Shadow 6. Silence entered the room like a weapon. Even the hum of the projector seemed to die mid-note. Someone shifted a chair, scraped, then nothing. It was the kind of quiet that feels alive, that presses against skin. Across from me, a young officer, Jason Cole, froze. His mouth opened, closed, then he rose to his feet before he seemed to realize he was standing. "Ma'am," he said quietly, "you are the pilot from Silent Ridge." The words dropped heavy, not as question, but as recognition. Brent's expression drained of color. I met his eyes, the same one you joked about. The moment stretched brittle and perfect. Every man in that room had heard the name Silent Ridge in debriefings, rumors, or bar stories. They all knew it as a legend dressed as caution. Now it had a face sitting 10 feet away. I set my papers down, the motion deliberate, not theatrical. "Commander Halverson," I said, "if you would prefer, I can handle the turbulence section after all." He tried to recover. His mouth shaped a smile that never reached his eyes. "That will not be necessary, Commander." I stepped closer to the screen, tapped the data summary, and continued as if nothing had happened. The words came cleaner, now sharper. Every line of the presentation carried the weight of that silence. I did not need to raise my voice. Power has volume only when restraint holds it steady. When I finished, no one moved. Brent finally clapped once awkwardly, as if sound might repair the air. "Good work," he said. "We will break for 10 minutes." I nodded and gathered my notes. Lexi caught my sleeve as I passed. "Ma'am," her voice a whisper, "does he know?" "He does now." She exhaled like someone who had been holding her breath for a year. The hallway outside the briefing room felt colder. Through the glass, I saw Brent still standing at the table, his posture rigid, the easy smile gone. The other officers murmured low, glancing at him, then at the door I had walked through. Whispers moved faster than wind. By noon, the story had spread across the base. She is Shadow 6. She saved a SEAL team. And he mocked her. I overheard it in the mess hall line in the corridor, even in the hum of the radio chatter. The respect came not from admiration, but from discomfort, the kind that forces reflection. At lunch, Lexi sat across from me, her eyes bright. "You did not even raise your voice," she said. "You did not have to." "That is the thing about storms," I told her. "They do not announce themselves. They arrive." In the afternoon, Brent's aide appeared at my office door, his expression careful. "The Admiral requests you at 0900 tomorrow." I nodded. "Tell him I will bring the weather report." The aide blinked, not sure if I was joking. I was not. He left without another word. That evening, I walked to the pier. The sea looked quiet, but I could see the wind working its pattern beneath the surface. Some men mistake calm for safety. I had learned better. The waves broke soft against the hulls of the docked aircraft, light scattering over metal. I thought about that morning, the laughter, the silence, the moment the truth entered the room, and decided to stay. He told me to fetch coffee. I served consequences. I smiled at the thought. Tomorrow would not be easier. Nothing worth restoring ever is. The stars came out faint against the haze, and the night pressed closer, not hostile, just waiting. If you have ever been laughed at for surviving, you will understand what came next. By morning, the base had turned into an echo chamber. Conversations paused when I walked past, then resumed in lowered voices, half awe, half disbelief. She is Shadow 6. The phrase rippled through hangars, cafeterias, and corridors like wind moving through metal. People looked up from their screens when I entered rooms. Some saluted faster, some forgot entirely. Fame in uniform is rarely respect. It is curiosity with rank. I spent the morning reviewing flight safety forms no one would read just to keep my hands steady. At 1000 hours, the phone on my desk rang. The aide's voice was clipped. Commander Halverson would like to see you in his office. Now. I said thank you as if it were an invitation and not a summons. His office sat on the top-floor glass walls, framing the bay like a trophy. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting in enough light to look deliberate. He stood when I entered, motioning to the chair across from him. "Let's settle this privately," he said. His tone tried to sound calm, but his shoulders gave him away. I closed the door behind me and stayed standing. "You laughed publicly," I said. His eyes narrowed. "That was a misunderstanding," he began, but I cut him off. "The room laughed because you told them to." The silence that followed was short-surgical. Brent exhaled through his nose, then leaned forward on his desk. "You enjoy this attention, do not you? The myth of the Reaper, the storm, the survivor." I looked at the medals pinned behind his glass display case. "You built your career on the same myth I said. The difference is I was there." He straightened, jaw tight. "You think one story will change how this place runs. I do not need to change it," I said. "I just need to stop pretending it is clean." His hand hit the desk, not hard enough to echo, just enough to confess frustration. "You are out of line, Commander." "Maybe," I said. But the line moved first. He stood then, pacing behind the desk like a man searching for a version of himself that could win this conversation. "You are reopening wounds that cost good men their reputations," he said. "Good men," I repeated. "The ones who called a near-death rescue bad leadership." He looked toward the window. The bay glittered with sunlight that refused to warm. He finally said, "You should be careful. Reputations are fragile." I smiled. So is truth. But it outlives us both. The door opened behind me without a knock. Aaron walked in carrying the confidence of someone who still thought rank came with immunity. He nodded at Brent before turning to me. "I hear you are famous again," he said, smiling thin. "The last time you were this loud, people ended up dead." Brent stayed quiet, watching him, maybe waiting to see what would happen. "You think they will believe a woman with a failed marriage," Aaron said. His voice carried the kind of contempt that used to sound like charm. I did not move. "They do not need to believe me," I said. "They will hear you." He blinked the first crack. "What is that supposed to mean? It means you are running out of places to hide your version of history." He laughed once a sound with no humor. "You are still the same Elise, dramatic as ever. I learned drama from men who mistook control for loyalty." He glanced at Brent, who still said nothing. The silence between them was a transaction years old. "You should both know something I said. There is a duplicate file of Silent Ridge in the archives. The copy lists the abort denial under your name, Aaron." Brent's breath caught before he could disguise it. Aaron's smirk faltered, then returned weaker. "That file was destroyed years ago." I looked at him. "You are welcome to believe that. It will make the hearing more interesting." His voice sharpened. "You have no authority to access those records." I stepped closer until I could see my reflection in the glass behind him. "I had every authority that day in the storm when you told me to keep flying through ice because aborting would look weak on your report. You called it command. I call it negligence." He turned toward Brent as if expecting rescue. Brent looked down. I walked to the door. "The meeting is over," I said. Brent said nothing. Aaron followed me into the hallway, his words chasing like debris. "You are going to regret this." I stopped. "They called it damage. I called it evidence." He took another step forward but did not reach me. The door closed between us and the sound felt final. Outside, the sky stretched wide and impossibly calm. Pilots trained above the bay, small dots carving paths through blue. He built walls with favors. I learned to fly over them. Back at my office, Lexi was waiting, eyes alert, posture tense. "You met with them," she said. "Both of them." She hesitated. "Did he threaten you?" "Only in old languages," I said. She looked down at the floor, then back at me. "I spoke with someone in records," she said. "They confirmed an unusual access last week. Someone tried to delete an index but failed. It matches the Ridge classification number." I nodded. "Proof is like gravity. You can deny it, but it still holds." She smiled slightly. "What now?" "Now we make sure the story stops belonging to them." She left quietly. I sat by the window and watched the sunlight shift across the desk. The hum of engines outside grew steady, familiar. Every pilot knows that calm before turbulence. I knew it too. This calm was not safety. It was alignment. The system had begun to tilt. The truth had found its altitude. I closed my eyes and breathed until the sound of the sea returned. Tomorrow would bring movement, not noise. The spring fog came early that year, a soft blanket that made the base look like it was holding its breath. By April, the rumor of hearings had already reached every corner of command, but no one said it aloud. Silence was protocol, but fear was the unspoken language. I had begun to recognize its grammar in every hallway glance. Lexi showed up at my office late in the afternoon, eyes wide and jaw tight, holding something small enough to hide in her fist. She placed it on my desk without a word. It was a black USB drive, scratched and unlabeled, the kind used before encrypted systems became standard. I stared at it for a long second. "Where did you get this?" Her voice was barely a whisper. "Storage bay 3 lower cabinet behind the spare batteries." I was looking for maintenance records, but this was wedged under the drawer. The truth was never lost, just locked in the wrong drawer. I plugged it in carefully, half expecting nothing. Instead, the screen blinked with a single audio file labeled SR06166 transcript. The timestamp made my skin tighten. June 2016, the month of Silent Ridge. I clicked play. Static filled the room first, then my own voice from years ago. "Request abort visibility 0. The sound was faint but unmistakable. Then his voice, colder, confident. "Negative, proceed." The next seconds were chaos. The whine of engines straining against ice, the crack of a mic cutting out, and finally the explosion. Then silence. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that swallows everything. Lexi stood perfectly still. She had never heard the raw version, only the official one, sanitized by bureaucracy. She covered her mouth as if to hold the air inside. I paused the playback and leaned back, my pulse slow and deliberate. He silenced me once. This time, the silence was his. We both knew what this meant. The file was evidence, direct and unedited, a ghost trapped in data. It would not stay buried now. Brent was the first to know because I made sure he would hear it before anyone else. I sent for him under the pretense of reviewing a training outline. When he arrived, I played the clip without introduction. His face changed by degrees composure, giving way to recognition, then to dread. When the recording ended, he stayed quiet for nearly a minute. Finally, he said, "Where did you get this?" It was not a question, it was a plea. "You already know," I said. He shook his head as if the gesture could erase sound. "Do you have any idea what happens if this surfaces?" I said, "Yes." "Accountability." He slammed a hand on the desk. "This is not justice, it is destruction." I looked at him. Destruction of what? A myth, a lie, or the comfort of forgetting? He turned toward the window, his reflection pale against the glass. He looked older suddenly, as if the truth had drawn years out of him. He said, "You think you can win against a system that rewards silence?" I said, "No, I can only stop being part of it." He left without another word. That night, Lexi received an email from Personnel Command. Effective immediately reassignment to Guam Logistics Support. The kind of transfer that sounded administrative, but meant exile. She came to my quarters, shaking, holding the printed memo. "They want me gone by Friday." I took the paper from her hands and tore it cleanly in half. "Not yet," I said. She looked terrified. "They said I accessed restricted archives. They will court-martial me." "No, they will not. I have the file." Her breath caught. "You are going to use it." "Not yet." The timing has to sting. She sat down, still trembling. "What if they delete it?" "They cannot." I made 3 copies, one in my locker, one off base, and one already encrypted with the Pentagon oversight key. Her eyes widened. "You planned this?" I smiled faintly. "I learned from the men who taught me not to trust clean paperwork." She laughed once, half disbelief, half relief. "You're not afraid." "Fear and flight use the same fuel," I said. "I just burn it differently." We stayed silent for a while, the hum of the overhead vent filling the space between us. Outside, fog rolled across the tarmac, wrapping the lights in ghostly halos. The truth was alive now. It only needed an audience. The next morning, Brent cornered me outside the hangar. "You are playing a dangerous game, Elise." I said, "No. I am playing fair for the first time." He lowered his voice. "Do not bring that file to the hearing. You will destroy everything left of your career." "My career ended in that storm," I said. "This is just paperwork catching up." He stared at me, then said, "If you go through with this, they will turn on you too. Then let them. I have spent years inside storms worse than politics." He looked like he wanted to argue, but words abandoned him. He walked away, shoulders tight silhouette swallowed by fog. That night, I sat alone with the USB drive listening to the recording one last time. Each sound had a temperature. The radio static cold, the engine scream white hot, the explosion frozen mid-air. The only warm thing was my voice. It sounded calm, too calm. I had forgotten what courage without noise sounded like. I closed my eyes and remembered the storm, the rotor shaking the moon cutting through snow. Survival had a sound too. It was not triumph, it was endurance. Lexi called near midnight. She said, "They froze my access badge. I cannot enter base tomorrow." I said, "Then meet me at the East Gate at 6. Bring nothing." She hesitated. "Why are we doing this?" "Because they already decided who the hero was. Now they need to learn who the survivor is." The next morning, the sun broke through the fog gold over the bay. I drove past the pier, the USB drive in my pocket, heavier than it should have been. I thought about the years between the storm and now all the silence that had built walls around truth. He silenced me once. This time, the silence was his. The hearing would be soon. The tape would wait until it mattered most. For now, I carried it like a promise, small and indestructible. The Pentagon hearing room felt colder than any storm I had ever flown through. The fluorescent lights were too bright, the air too still, and the long table in front of me stretched like a runway lined with judgment. It was May, the kind of Washington morning that looked gentle, until you stepped into the machinery of power. I sat in the witness chair, palms flat on the folder that held the recording, the one I had guarded for months. Across the table sat the Board of Inquiry 3 officers whose expressions were carved from protocol. At the far end, Brent and Aaron waited side by side. Their uniforms looked immaculate, but their eyes betrayed exhaustion. Aaron's arrogance had thinned into something brittle. Brent's face was pale as if he had spent the night trying to memorize innocence. When the chair of the board spoke, the words came slow, deliberate. "Commander Elise Rowan, you are here to present evidence regarding Operation Silent Ridge." I nodded. My throat felt steady, my pulse did not. I plugged in the USB drive. The room's silence was absolute, the kind reserved for prayers and verdicts. The static began first, the sound of ghosts breathing through old radio waves. Then my own voice filled the speakers. "Request abort visibility 0. The sound of wind followed, then Aaron's voice, sharp and certain. "Negative, proceed." The explosion came next. Even after 8 years, it still carried heat. When the silence returned, it was heavier than before. Brent closed his eyes. Aaron stared at the table. The chairman leaned forward. "Commander Rowan, how did you obtain this recording?" "It was found by an officer under my supervision," I said. It had been hidden, but not destroyed. The truth was simply waiting for air. The chairman nodded. The panel conferred briefly, their whispers dry as paper. Then he gestured for me to continue. "Leadership is not about command," I said. "It is about accountability." The words echoed softly off the walls. Aaron shifted his fingers, tapping once against the desk, then stopping. Brent looked down, his shoulders sinking. The chairman turned to them. "Admiral Halverson, Captain Briggs, do you have anything to say before the board renders judgment?" For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Brent stood. His voice cracked once before finding rhythm. "I authorized that mission's report. I also accepted a payment in 2017 to revise the documentation." His admission fell like metal hitting concrete. The room absorbed it without flinching. Aaron stared at him, disbelief breaking across his face. Brent continued, his voice shaking. "She was right. I buried a mistake to protect a system that rewards silence." The chairman nodded gravely. "Sit down, Admiral." Aaron rose, next defiant, out of habit. "That recording is out of context," he said. "Conditions were changing, communication unstable, and I made a judgment call." His tone grew louder with each word. "Command decisions are made under pressure. Every pilot knows that. I did what I was trained to do," I interrupted quietly. "No, you did what your pride told you to do." The words stopped him mid-breath. The board members exchanged glances. The chairman raised a hand. "Enough. The findings are clear." He turned to the clerk. "Read the recommendation." The clerk stood and began. "Admiral Brent Halverson, demotion to captain and reassignment to the Naval Ethics and Leadership Training Command, Norfolk. Captain Aaron Briggs' case referred to civilian court under negligence and falsification of military records." The room held steady silence as the words settled. Aaron's jaw locked. Brent sat motionless, staring at his own hands as if seeing them for the first time. The chairman looked at me. "Commander Rowan, do you wish to add anything for the record?" I thought of the storm of the men we brought home, of the years of quiet that had followed. "Silence does not mean weakness," I said. "Sometimes it is the sound of accuracy." The statement was entered without comment. The board adjourned. The sound of chairs scraping the floor was the only applause. Justice does not roar. It lands like a blade. Outside, the sun had climbed above the Potomac, throwing thin light across the marble steps. Reporters waited behind the security cordon cameras, ready, but none called my name. The story would surface in documents, not headlines, and that was enough. Lexi stood by the railing, her uniform pressed her smile, faint but sure. "Did it go how you expected?" she asked. I said it went how it needed to. She nodded, relief softening her face. "He will face trial," she said. "Both of them will." Maybe I said, but the system already heard what it needed. She looked out toward the river. "You could have asked for more." I shook my head. "Justice is not a prize, it is correction." She smiled. "You sound like a teacher." "Maybe I am." The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rain from the west. We stood there for a while, watching the light shift on the water. She finally asked, "What now?" I looked at the horizon where the city met the sky. "Now we wait for the weather to change." She laughed softly. "You always talk like a pilot." I smiled. Because I am one. If you have ever seen someone finally face what they ran from, it does not look like triumph. It looks like release. I walked away from the Pentagon steps and into the new silence that followed. Clean, weightless, honest. The November wind off Coronado carried the taste of salt and distance. 6 months had passed since the hearing, and the air finally felt like it belonged to no one. The beach was almost empty that morning, only the sound of waves folding over themselves and gulls tracing lazy arcs across the gray sky. I walked along the shore with my boots sinking into wet sand, each step erasing itself behind me. Peace had become a quiet routine. No ceremonies, no applause, just air moving freely again. The sea has a way of stripping everything down to scale. Rank pride, pain, it all dissolves into rhythm. I had started teaching part-time at the base flight school, nothing official, just lectures about weather systems and decision thresholds. The cadets listened carefully, unaware that most of what I was teaching had nothing to do with wind. That morning, I saw him before I heard him. Aaron stood near the edge of the dunes, a silhouette outlined by the weak sun. His suit was wrinkled, his posture forced upright by habit rather than strength. The sight of him stirred nothing familiar, only recognition. He waited until I reached him, then spoke first. I lost everything, Elise. His voice was low, stripped of the confidence it once wore like armor. You could help me clear my name. He looked thinner, his hair cut unevenly as if done by impatience. I stopped a few feet away. You lost your name when you forged mine. The words came out calm, not bitter, just final. He blinked as if expecting a different tone, something that could pass for sympathy. His laugh was small and cracked. You think you are clean in all this? I did what anyone would have done to survive in that system. No, I said. You did what made the system rot. He looked away toward the sea where the light broke over the water. You think they care about justice. You were their tool, Elise, their story to polish a new code of ethics. They will forget you when the next scandal arrives. I nodded. That may be true, but forgetting is not the same as lying. He took a step closer. You could speak for me. You could tell them the order was misunderstood. It would help me get reinstated. His voice trembled at the edges, a man begging for relevance more than redemption. I said nothing for a long moment. The only sound was the surf hitting the rocks below the pier. He looked smaller than I remembered, not physically, but in presence. The weight he once carried was gone, replaced by a hollow kind of exhaustion. You came here because you believe mercy is currency, I said finally. It is not. Forgiveness is not freedom. It is distance. He frowned, confusion and anger twisting his expression. You think you are better than me? No, I said. Just finished with you. His eyes flashed with something desperate. You owe me that, he said. I almost laughed. I owe you nothing but the truth. You had the chance to own it years ago. Now all you have is aftermath. He clenched his fists and then let them fall open. There is nothing left for me, he said. That is not my doing, I replied. It is your design. He turned, then looking out at the water again, the wind tearing at his collar. I wondered if he realized how ordinary he looked, stripped of his rank and posture. He stayed silent for a while before saying softly, "Do you ever regret it?" I shook my head. Regret is for the ones who never acted. He nodded once, not in agreement but in surrender. Then he walked away down the beach, his footsteps vanishing in the tide almost as soon as they formed. No music followed, no tears, just the sound of the wind closing the distance between us. I stood there until the horizon blurred into mist. He came back asking for mercy. I taught him consequences. 3 weeks later, I received a message from Lexi, now stationed in Washington. Her email was brief. Briggs arrested. Defense contract fraud. Federal custody pending. I read it twice and closed the laptop. The news did not bring relief, only symmetry. The world had a way of correcting itself, not cleanly, but inevitably. That night, I walked the pier alone. The lamps glowed in rows reflected in the black water below. Somewhere across the bay, naval aircraft took off their engines, fading into the night like promises dissolving into distance. I leaned on the railing and listened. The waves moved steady beneath me, unconcerned, unchanged. The same rhythm that once drowned orders now carried peace. People think justice arrives like thunder. It does not. It lands quiet, measured like the tide, reclaiming what was always its own. I watched the horizon until the stars came out faint and scattered. The cold crept in, but it felt honest, the kind that tells you the day has done its work. Somewhere out there, a man was learning that truth cannot be negotiated, not even with pity. The sea would forget his name the same way it had once erased mine, only to give it back clean. I turned toward the lights of the city, toward the sound of life continuing without ceremony. Behind me, the waves whispered what storms always whisper once they end: survive and keep moving. The morning sun rose over North Island with the soft precision of memory. It had been a year since the hearing, and the base looked both familiar and new, like a photograph gently retouched by time. The air smelled of salt and jet fuel, a mixture that belonged to endings as much as beginnings. The banners fluttered in the light breeze, reading, "Leadership Under Fire," the name of the new program that had replaced the old command course. Rows of cadets filled the bleachers. Crisp uniforms pressed their faces, carrying the mixture of pride and uncertainty that marks first victories. I sat near the back, not in uniform, only a dark navy blazer and the quiet of someone who no longer needed to prove belonging. The applause rose and fell in waves, distant but warm. Lexi stood on stage now, an instructor, her posture steady, her voice carrying across the courtyard with the calm authority she once doubted she would ever earn. Her speech was short and deliberate. She spoke of courage not as noise but as endurance, of leadership not as control but as listening. When she said, "They said your report changed everything," she glanced toward me just long enough for our eyes to meet. I smiled small and private. "Then teach them to listen before they lead." She nodded, and her voice grew stronger. The cadets listened, some taking notes, though the lesson was not in the words, but in the way she stood unshaken. When the ceremony ended, the band played softly, the kind of music that fills space without asking for attention. The sun climbed higher, painting the sea with streaks of gold. Families took pictures, laughter echoing off the hangars, the kind of ordinary joy that feels almost sacred after years of noise. Brent was not there. His name appeared in the program under acknowledgments assigned now to the Naval Ethics Academy in Virginia. A fitting exile, not punishment, but reflection. The report had recommended reassignment and the board had agreed. It was what he needed, even if he never thanked me. The man who once mocked turbulence now taught others how to face it. I wondered if he told the story differently, or if he finally understood that storms do not need villains, only lessons. I stayed seated as the crowd began to disperse. The sound of boots on pavement blended with the calls of gulls and the distant rumble of takeoff drills. For the first time in years, the base sounded peaceful. Peace does not sound like applause. It sounds like breathing again. Lexi found me later by the courtyard steps. She was still in uniform, sunlight glinting off her insignia. She looked older, not by years, but by clarity. "You should be proud," she said. "They quote you in the leadership manuals now." I laughed softly. "Manuals are fine," I said, "but memory teaches better." She tilted her head, smiling. "You always know how to make truth sound gentle." "Only after the storm," I said. She hesitated before adding, "They asked me to name the next training aircraft after something symbolic. I chose RZ-1. I paused. The call sign. She nodded. Not for what it meant then, but for what it means now. Respect zero. Start again from nothing. I liked that. She saluted lightly before heading back toward the hangar. The wind caught her hair as she walked, and for a moment I saw myself years ago standing too straight, trying too hard to be invincible. Now I knew better. Invincibility was only another kind of fear. I left the courtyard and walked toward the small cafe near the pier, the same one I used to visit before dawn flights. The owner still remembered how I liked my coffee black, with 1 sugar. I sat by the window, the sea stretching wide and endless beyond the glass. Helicopters moved across the horizon, their rotors cutting sunlight into ribbons. I sipped slowly, letting the warmth anchor me. The chatter around me was low and unhurried cadets talking about postings, families planning dinners, laughter threaded through fatigue, ordinary peace. A young officer at the next table turned and looked at me with the cautious curiosity of someone recognizing a name but not a face. "Ma'am, were you really Shadow 6? His tone was polite, hesitant, as if the question might break something sacred. I smiled. No, I was the storm she flew through. He blinked, unsure what to say next, then nodded and returned to his meal. Outside, the tide shifted, drawing a thin white line across the sand. The air was clear enough to see the ships anchored far offshore, their hulls glinting like old coins in the sun. I thought about the years it took to reach this quiet, the hearings, the anger, the aftermath, and how justice once served turns into something gentler, understanding. The world moves on as it should, and what remains is not the noise but the steadiness that follows. Peace is not reward, it is repair. The clock above the counter ticked steady each second, carrying a weightless kind of grace. I finished my coffee and stood leaving a tip folded beneath the cup. As I stepped outside, the wind carried the faint sound of rotor blades from the runway, low and even. The next generation was already taking off, unaware that every ascent carries history in its shadow. I walked along the pier until the sunlight met the water and the horizon blurred. If this story reminded you of someone strong who was silenced, share it. Let them know storms end.